Well, one question we get very frequently, and that is, how can I make more money?
You were listening to Wealth Talks with the McPhees. There are lots of ways to make money out there, and if you tried to put together an exhaustive list, I think that would be pretty futile.
I think, too, we have to really boil down what is the question that's being really asked here? Is it just to have more money?
So it's the question behind the question.
It is. It's the why. There's a lot of people that have lots of money and recently wrote about this, about how celebrities, they have lots of money. They've made lots of money, and they travel around in these fancy jets, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they have a guilt complex, and so they try to offset that guilt complex of what they're doing to pollute the world, and by trying to plant trees, and they end up causing more disaster because those trees they plant are destroying ecological systems and environmental systems that have been set up by the Creator. And so just because we have more money, that's not the answer. Why do we want the money?
And it sounds like, too, that you're saying that there's people who have a lot of money, but they're not content with it because maybe they know the back scene of how they got that money and they're not really satisfied with that, or they're not, and maybe it's not even the back scene, but maybe they don't have an attitude of contentment or gratitude. And so whatever they make, it's not very satisfying. Not that we should ever be satisfied, but we need to have a feeling of contentment.
Right. And then there's the people that just feel like they have to give back. And that attitude of giving back means that they felt like they took something that wasn't theirs sometimes. And I'm not saying that everybody says giving back is doing that, because sometimes it's just a colloquial statement that they're making. But,
Yeah.
Charles Wesley said a long time ago that you should make as much money as you can, that you should save as much money as you can, and you should give as much money as you can. And that produces wealth.
And that's interesting because when we hear that, save as much and give away as much, it sounds like it's two different things, but it's not necessarily two different things.
It isn't.
It's not contradictory.
It isn't. And so this guilt trip that celebrities are trying to give back to the environment because they feel they're destroying it in their jet traffic actually ends up doing more harm than good. And a lot of the things that people do to make more money end up causing more harm than good for them because they haven't got the basis down. Now, if you want to become wealthy and have sustainable wealth, you have to be never afraid of hard work. You have to never be afraid of continuing to get educated. And you combine that with your faith and your belief system and your values, and that's what creates lasting, sustainable wealth. And money is just part of that.
Mm-hmm. Education kind of goes along with this as well, because Albert Einstein said, education is what remains after one has forgotten what one learned in school. And so education in that sense is more of an ongoing process, whereas schooling, might be the impartation of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of things that you'll find in the schooling system versus actually getting an education when it comes to talking about money and, making money, some of the principles for that we're talking about today, is that, in school, they'll tell you to go and get a job.
That's what school's for, is to prepare you to get a job.
Right. But if you think about the financial principle that's behind it, you really want an income. It doesn't necessarily matter whether you may get that income through a job, but then that income becomes a tool that you can use as a stepping stone. Maybe to get a higher income, maybe as a purpose to get whatever else that you're looking for. But the value of having an income goes beyond the fact that is often taught in the school system of just getting a job.
I can't remember where I read it, but it's astonishing to me that most people, once they graduate from high school, never read a book again in their life. And yet, I was just reading the autobiography of Calvin Coolidge, one of the better presidents that we've had in these United States. And he said that his education continued throughout his lifetime because his education was in the law, and he knew that if he could understand the law, then he could make the American system of government work for everybody. And so that was a process that started when he was in school, but it went his entire lifetime.
It was a much longer term vision, wasn't it?
And when we have that view of education instead of school, that we graduate, I remember it used to be called a commencement ceremony rather than a graduation ceremony. And a commencement means that you are just beginning, whereas a graduation means you've finished.
It's interesting because words are important in how we think about things by the words that we use. And so when we use graduate, it's kind of like, ha ha, I've arrived, everything's done, rather than, oh, I am ready to begin.
Yes.
And that's important. Something also that's going through my mind as we are talking here today is something Zig Ziglar used to always say, and he's, for those of you who don't know, he was a motivational speaker, has had a big influence on our family and consequently our business, our family life, everything. But he said, you can have everything you want in life if you'll just help enough other people get what they want. And there's a lot of truth in that. And I think that when you have that in your mindset of how can I serve this person? How can I help them get what they want? Then, and you're solving that problem, then you're earning an income by that. There is no guilt at the end of the day because you have satisfied someone, not in a cheating way. I mean, if you tried to do it in a cheating way, that's going to be very disconcerting. But if you have really done your best to help them get what they want, that's a very satisfying way to earn an income.
Yeah, and I love what he would always, you mentioned you can't do it in a cheating way, and that's why I love what Ziglar would always say after he said that. He said, you can have everything in life that you want as long as you help enough other people get what they want. And then he would say, but that has to be a philosophy and not a tactic.
Oh, yes. A philosophy, not a tactic. That's very good.
The people that would be going looking to cheat, or figure out something to get everything that they wanted in life, those people would be using it as a tactic, not as a philosophy.
Well, we talked about Calvin Coolidge as being a good president. There was another president that talked quite a bit about money, Abraham Lincoln, and he talked about 10 things about how to make money. And it was written later by a pastor named Borcher. I probably am pronouncing his name wrong. But one of the things he said is that you cannot bring about prosperity by discouraging thrift. And Michelle, I remember when we were first married, we practiced a lot of thrift in our life. And it wasn't a bad thing. It set us on a course that made us frugal for the rest of our life. I mean, we look at things a little bit different than some people. It's not that we deprived ourselves by any means, but we were careful about what we ate or how many times we ate out. And we were careful about what we spent money on clothes. I remember you made a lot of the children's clothes. You began to cut my hair, so I didn't have a barber fee. And that just extended, and that is money saved. It reminds me of an old farmer we used to live by in Virginia, and he said his father always taught him, if you can't make a dime today, save a dime. And I think that that Americans often discourage thrift as being cheap or just trying to cut corners or something. But thrift is really, really a way to create wealth.
So I have a little personal story here on this, and we recently moved. We made a big move too. Went from Nevada to Indiana, near Indianapolis, and going grocery shopping is a new adventure. We still have Costco. But it turns out that the things they have in Henderson, Nevada Costco are quite different than the things they have in Indianapolis Costco. So, I can shop at Costco, but then the other grocery stores that I shopped at, they are quite different as well. And going to the grocery store, when I was talking to one of my daughters, it probably takes about 3 times the amount of time that it would normally take for me to go to the grocery store because I have to find everything. Stores are not laid out the same way. I have to find things. I can't just look for the label I'm looking for on the tomatoes because this label looks different. So all those things take time. And the other day I was walking through the store and I realized during part of it, hey, Michelle, you can't just be looking for the best deal either. So that was one side of me. And then the other side said, yes, but people who are wealthy are careful with their wealth and very, careful about what they purchase at the same time. And it made me think of one of our clients or called in, Don, and I think maybe he wrote to you, John, and he was talking about flying in someone's jet. And then he said it was like the smoothest landing he had ever felt. And the guy said, well, yeah, I got to be careful on the brakes. And, just that we don't have to go to the grocery store and feel an urgency to not spend, more dimes or pennies than what we would at another store. But at the same time, we want to be careful with our money because we earn it and we have an obligation to take care of it. And if we can take care of the money that we earn, it can go farther. And we can earn more money, yes, but we can also learn to take better care of the money that we have.
Well, I was just talking this last
That's a
couple of
great
days
analogy.
with some people that are in missions work and trying to expand their idea about what wealth is and money. And I asked them a question that neither one could answer, and that is, why did the soldiers cast lots for Jesus' garments under the cross? And one of them snidely said, well, because God prophesied it would happen that way. And I said, absolutely, but why did the soldiers do it? Because they weren't in tune to what God prophesied.
So you're asking the question behind the question.
And the reason that they cast lots is the garment that they were casting lots on was the most expensive garment that could be purchased at that time because it was one solid piece of cloth. It had been woven out of one solid piece of cloth. So the Lord of the universe, when he took on manhood, wasn't afraid to wear the best. But I'll bet you he didn't have 100 of those. And that's frugality too. There's nothing wrong with having the best that money can buy, as long as we don't have 2,000 pair of shoes like Fernando Marcos did. It's excess. That's an Americanism too, is that we get in an excess, and that is not frugal.
Well, Zig Ziglar also used to say, there's nothing wrong with having money as long as the money doesn't have you.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's what you're talking about. Christ wasn't just influenced by money because he spent time with the poor and the needy. But he also wasn't... He wasn't uncomfortable with the wealth and the riches that were here. Obviously, it wasn't really wealth and riches to him when he owns the whole universe. So maybe he did have 2,000 of them, not in his personal possession.
Right.
Something else that has become really popular and even more common, it seems like, with social media is that we try to bash the rich and tear them down. And Abraham Lincoln, in those 10 points, he said, you cannot help the poor by destroying the rich.
Absolutely not. In fact, who was it that said one of the best things you can do for the poor is not be one of them?
That's right. And Jesus, when he
I
walked
believe
the
that was
earth,
Benjamin Franklin.
I think you might be right.
he once told a parable and said that, the men of this world are more wise with money than the rest of us. And that wasn't a compliment to the rest of us. We need to be aware that there are certain principles that money lives and works and operates by. And those are part of God's universe too. We need to learn those and not just get on this holier than thou attitude and saying that money is just filthy lucre. So it's our attitude. Do we feel resentful to the rich? Do we feel jealous of the rich? Do we, well, we should learn from the rich so that we can have more money to do more of the things that our values would have us do.
Some of the things, as we're talking about the difference between typical thinking, schooling, versus a real education with a real life application, some of the terms that we can think about is a lot of people think about saving, right? But why are you saving? You're saving to build assets. You can also save by managing your cash flow wisely. So those two are connected, and education helps you see the deeper meaning in some of those terms put to work. A lot of people are taught to pay off your house, and that becomes the main focus of their life. But the wealthy, they tend to think about managing their debt. Okay, there's an element of cash flow management to that, but leveraging that debt then and using it to create long-term wealth. Because you can do both, especially when a house is involved oftentimes. A lot of run-of-the-mill employees are taught to fund a 401k or IRA. Not necessarily the reason why, just do it. Because that's the best thing to do, according to the gurus out there. And yet the idea behind that is really to avoid taxes. So what if contributing to your 401k and your IRA doesn't save you in taxes? Is it still a good idea? Not so much. And so some of that reasoning, if you're just going after the lines that are quoted by the teachers and the gurus out there today, you're going to miss the bigger picture that really the education that you want to take away from this is about avoiding taxes. Now, could some people use a 401k or IRA at times to help avoid taxes long term? Yes. But it's not always the first thing that people should go after. In fact, we find as we work with people that many times it's not the first thing that they should go after, because if you build your wealth in a vehicle like that, then what happens when you need to access some of it along the way? It becomes much more difficult. And that brings us to one of the last points that I was thinking about here, and that is, people that think in a typical mindset tend to say, oh, just get term life insurance. When you get older, you're not going to need it anymore because hopefully you've built enough assets. That's the conventional, typical line of thinking. I actually shouldn't say it's conventional. It's the typical line of thinking today. But people that are really thinking about the next generation, if they're really thinking long-term, they're going to be interested in whole life insurance as well. Maybe they'll still have some term insurance for those short-term needs, but they're also going to want it to be building for the long-term needs as well.
I was just talking to a couple of people that their term insurance just expired. And now they've got kids that are 8 to 14 years old, and they realize, oh, that term insurance that I was told to buy really didn't do its purpose, because it was supposed to raise my family and get them educated and pay the house off. And I still got kids at home, and the house isn't paid off, and they're not gone to college yet.
Yes.
And so, it's really sad that people buy into this, but when people are younger, they often are swayed easily by people that sound convincing and are dominant. And that goes back to the whole education thing. We need to always be, the word educate comes from the word elucidate, which means shed light on things. And we need to start expecting the younger generation to be able to discern the truth rather than just dictate to them what to do.
So that's quite a contrast. Educate, elucidate, bring light to, where what we often see in schools today, the education, I've got quotes around that.
It's indoctrination.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. A lot of times it's indoctrination on subjects and subject matter that should not be discussed and really isn't even have any connection with reality most of the time. So, we need to be elucidated and thinking about things, not just accepting whatever's being said as status quo.
And this brings up another point that Abraham Lincoln talked about too. And he says, you cannot help someone permanently by doing for them what they could and should do for themselves. Education today, or schooling today, is thinking for people and then telling them what to think.
Oh,
And Nelson Nash always said, that's the problem with America today. We haven't been taught to think. And he talks about traveling behind a truck that says this truck paid $8,390 some dollars in taxes last year. And he said it took him several miles following that truck to realize that truck didn't pay a dime of taxes. Neither did the company that owned that truck.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
the consumers that bought the product. So the way we think about means everything, and we can't expect school to teach us what to think. It should be teaching us how to think. And when it would teach us how to think, schooling was very critical and helpful in this country. But once it became a dogma and an indoctrination program telling you what to think, that has become a problem. And it's the same thing in the financial world. We're told what to do and not told to think about what we need to do and decide and take the responsibility for that. And that's why I so much like The Richest Man in Babylon, because when the poor merchant came to the gold merchant and wanted to know how he got his gold, because he wasn't asking for his gold, he said, I'll tell you my secret. And it's a whole nother way of thinking about money. And that's what we base our teaching on here at McPhee Insurance.
yeah, totally. You mentioned that a lot of younger people tend to fall vulnerable to the dogmatic advice that's out there about do this, do that. And it's interesting. That's true. I think it's even becoming a bigger problem in society because people's attention spans seem to be shrinking. Because you can pull up a 60-second clip on Instagram that's entertaining,
Yeah.
but maybe it doesn't encapsulate the whole picture. And so it's a short clip, and we're continually consuming content in more of these short clips where we don't have to provide as much an attention span. Sometimes that can be good to get right down to the point, say what you're going to say, and don't try to embellish it. But sometimes you need that additional context to understand what is happening. And Nassim Taleb, he wrote a book about the black swan. He said positive advice, that would be like do this or do that. He said that's going to be in the realm of the charlatan when it comes to financial matters.
That is powerful.
So people can tell you, hey, do this, do this, do this. Here's my 7-step recipe to success. That's the province of the charlatan. You think about the 10 commandments, they're actually negative in nature. You shall not do this, you shall not do that. That actually covers a whole lot more ground than positive advice because there's a million ways you can try to do something. But to not do something, it tends to be a little bit more specific and defined. It's interesting. And so, as we're trying to simplify things in life today and make things shorter and shorter and more succinct, that can be good to a certain extent, but we have to be careful not to try and shortcut or short circuit the path to wealth.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know what? I just kind of got this mental picture, John, while you were talking, of a bowling alley. And when you take a child to the bowling alley, you can have those little bumper things that come up on the sides. So they can, roll or throw or whatever that ball down that alley. And it won't go on this side because of that bumper. It won't go on this side. But then there's a lot of movement of where it can go, and pins could be hit. But when those are down, they have a lot less chance of success. So knowing the parameters and having those in place, you may not necessarily get a complete strike, but you're going to hit something. And, we're all on different place in our paths. There's not just one way to roll that ball down to get all the pins. We've got to take where we're at and get as much as we can with what we have, with our power, with our aim, with all the things that we have. So that was kind of an interesting picture that came up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this whole idea about how to make more money, we have to have our independence, our liberty to act upon the things that we think are right, and also to bear the consequences of the things that we do wrong so we learn not to do them again. Otherwise, we're not building true wealth. And that's one of the reasons that America was such a great country to start off with, is that it gave us our freedom and our liberties, but it also gave us duty and responsibilities. And we live in a society today that doesn't want any duty or responsibilities, but wants freedom to do everything. But that's destructive, and that is not going to build the character and the courage necessary to build wealth.
Yep.
Yeah. Remembering those roots, sometimes the traditional is better than what's typical, whatever is popular. So there's definitely benefits. Before we tear down fences, we have to ask the question, why were they there in the first place? So be sure to download a copy of, or get your copy of A Biblical Guide to Personal Finance. You can also download a copy of the study guide for this book at wealthtalks.com, as well as get the links to access that book. That book has timeless truths from the Bible that talk about wealth and stewardship that will be super important in your journey to creating wealth in your life and increasing your income. You are listening to Wealth Talks with the McPhees. Have a wonderful week.